Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of Trans Focus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
A lot of trans folks come out to their managers because that's who the employee is most familiar with, especially in a large organization. They may not actually know the human resources person. So that trust is so pivotal.
I think so many people, if they're faced with something that they don't really understand, I can imagine that they just want to deal with it quickly. Like they just want to jump in and get all the details done. And actually the first response to that should be like connection based, I guess.
Today's episode is for every manager who wants to show up with confidence and care when a trans or non-binary employee comes out at work. Without a clear roadmap, too many trans employees are left to assume they have to navigate coming out all alone. But it doesn't have to be that way. We'll walk through best practices steps for leaders, from that crucial first response in an initial meeting to planning the right follow-up, updating systems and records, and guiding the team with thoughtful communication and education. We also cover some unique considerations that managers often miss, not because they don't care, but just it's not on their radar. But it doesn't have to be that way, and we can certainly make things better together. When managers lead with clarity and compassion, the whole workplace becomes safer and stronger for everyone. So let's get into it. I'm here with my colleague, Elle, and I'm really excited to get into this topic with you. How are you doing, Elle?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Excellent. Yeah.
This one is really interesting because you talk to a lot of organizations who have questions about this process, right? Before I ask the questions that I have for you, I really wanted to know how do managers typically feel about this to start with? Like, I imagine that it's a daunting topic to think about for a lot of managers.
Yes, it very much is. I know in talking to a lot of managers, even human resources, they often feel very overwhelmed by this topic. When it comes up, a trans person announces either to their manager, their supervisor, or even human resources, occasionally also the equity, diversity, and inclusion teams. And there's a pause because usually organizations just haven't thought it through. Not because they don't care. Of course, they know that trans people exist, but it just, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the wherewithal, whatever the case may be, and suddenly it's happening. And usually there's kind of a deer in headlights moment of like, oh shoot, what do we do? How do we even go about this? People want to do the right thing, but don't know how. And then often either over relying or not engaging, one extreme or the other. The trans employee is just sitting there. And so it can kind of get things off to the wrong start. And then unfortunately, people are left to kind of figure it out as they go, and usually bumping up against all kinds of things. So I usually have much compassion for human resource and managers because they're just trying to figure it out, and it's usually pretty stressful with everything else that they're having to do. So that's part of what's going on when somebody comes out.
What should managers be doing then? That's such a broad question, and I'm sure there's so many layers to it. But if we were to look at just like first things to consider, what would that be?
Absolutely. So, if an organization creates a toolkit in a kind of preemptive, setting the stage, working things out, making sure systems are set up, that could be really useful. But even if you don't have a toolkit, I think it's really important to acknowledge the trans or non-binary person, thanking them for coming out, for sharing this deep inner truth about themselves. Depending on how that person approaches you, you could even be celebratory, right? If they're very excited about it, you can match that energy. And then to say, we're going to work on this together, step by step. You don't have to overly explain that you don't know everything. That doesn't usually
Right.
inspire a lot of confidence. Even if
Yeah.
you do, it's not that you'd lie necessarily, but just you don't have to explain that you don't know everything. It's just that you'll figure it out together, right? Which
Mhm.
is an honest response, and one that's kind of positively oriented and creates that momentum to help each other out. And then from there, it's setting up a series of meetings to get to know this trans person's needs and what they have in mind or envisioned for the coming out process, and then diligently taking steps to implement that. So very
Mhm.
much having the employee in the driver's seat is really key part of the process.
I want to come back to this series of meetings that you just
Mhm.
mentioned, but before I do, would you mind just giving us a bit of a recap of the toolkit again? We do have an episode that came out already on that, and I will link that in the show notes. But could you just give us like a quick overview?
Yes. So the toolkit is a very important set of procedures that are outlined and delineated by an organization. We certainly have toolkit templates here at Transfocus from the work that we've done in guiding a lot of coming out processes and developing them together with many organizations that we've supported over the years. And what is a part of the toolkit is not just the coming out process. That's an important aspect, one that
Hmm.
many people focus on, especially managers and human resources. But it also includes what to do before somebody comes out. Even if you don't know somebody who is trans in your midst, doesn't mean that there isn't. Uh, People could
Hmm.
be deciding not to come out or deciding when to come out, and important signals that can be sent to indicate that it's safe to come out are really key as part of that. And then there's the after coming out, the continuous support, the allyship, the active, tangible day to day things that managers and really everyone in the organization can do. So it's a bit of a roadmap that kind of captures all these different stages of uh, experiences, needs, and how managers and other levels of the organization can show up for trans and non-binary folks in a very clear, easy to follow, easy to understand, explaining rationale. It's not coming from a policy angle, like thou
Hmm.
shalt. It's coming from a here's some suggestions, some ideas, some options. So yeah.
Sweet. Well, yeah, I'll link the episode that we go into that in a bit more detail. So I'll link that. Okay, so can I ask you then about, you said a series of meetings,
Mhm.
and I guess the reason for that would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that this is multi-layered and it's not a simple, hey, I'm trans, okay, great, off you go kind of situation. So could you talk about why there are multiples, and then also could you go into like that first meeting and what that looks like then?
Yes, such a good point that, often people, if they're new to the topic of gender diversity, think it's a really simple matter of just
Mhm.
kind of announcing and then that's it. We're done.
Right.
um, when in fact, there's actually a lot to it. The coming out process is quite layered and has many different components to it. And it's really important to coordinate and clarify both with the trans person and, say, human resources. Perhaps if it's a union environment, there might be union reps involved. So you
Mhm.
really want to be taking it step by step, very careful, because in some sense, a lot of sense, this is a very private matter until shared more widely with team or perhaps the whole company or organization. So you don't want to rush into things and get ahead of yourself or behind or whatnot. So we really want to be in lockstep with one another. And that's the reason for multiple uh, meetings that allow for that clarity and also for documentation. So writing it down
Mhm.
in a password protected file that everybody who needs access, including the employee, has that to understand, okay, we're all on the same page. We've clarified these details. So typically, people, do, especially managers, don't know what the details are, and so that's
Mhm.
where, again, the toolkit has that, including um, kind of a communications plan template as well, so that people can almost go through it in a checklist manner. So the first meeting is really important because this is often a lot of trans folks come out to their managers. We don't have specific stats, but just time and time again, the work that we've done, it has been managers first, because that's who the employee is most familiar with, especially in a large organization. They may not actually know the human resources person. So
Mm-hmm.
that trust is so pivotal to sharing this type of really personal, very intimate knowledge about oneself. And it's very scary for trans and non binary folks to share this with folks. So that's where it's really important for managers to receive this information with understanding, with support, with reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, trans and non-binary folks, they just, because of that fear, uh, having somebody say thank you, I, I I recognize this is a big step. You Thank you for coming, because we're going to help you with this and support you all the way along. You're not alone. All of these kinds of reassuring statements can bring down the anxiety level from like 10 maxed out to somewhere more comfortable, like 2, 3, right?
For
Um,
sure, yeah.
yeah. So those are some of the key aspects of the initial meeting, without overloading it and being like, okay, now we're going into all this action and here steps 5, 6, 7, and 8. You're like, holy smokes. Can we breathe and just receive the information and then schedule
Mm-hmm.
another meeting or a few to go through the detail?
I really like that, the way you just said that, because it's sort of like this. I think so many people, if they're faced with something that they don't really understand, I can imagine that they just want to deal with it quickly. Like they
Yep,
just want to jump in and get all the details done. And actually,
totally.
the first response to that should be like connection based, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Really well put. I think because people are unsure of their own skill set or capacity,
Hmm.
they want, or it's because it's pretty personal too, right? Like,
Right?
and it's
Yeah.
something maybe they've not dealt with or heard a lot about, or heard some very negative things, especially in the media exposure, rather
Hmm.
than like this personalized experience of somebody being trans or non-binary. So it's just like, hot potato,
Yeah.
like, let's throw this to the next thing quickly.
Right.
Rather than just being with the person. It doesn't actually require a lot except for
Mhm.
presence, which can be difficult for some, but just like, wow, this is so exciting. Or matching, if they're like, I understand why you feel unsure. There's perhaps they don't have a toolkit, so it's not clear what the next steps are. So
Mhm.
just kind of meeting somebody where they're at, listening to what they're saying, what they're concerned about, or what they're excited about, and just mirroring that back in an active listening way, right? And if they
Mhm.
start to go into the next steps, to be like, you know what? I understand you want to know what's next, and I certainly want to help be a part of that. And I'll go and clarify that. If you do want or need to dovetail or pivot to another team, then explain that part, to be like,
Mhm.
I need to go to human resources. I'm only going to go to one person in human resources, and we're going to establish the process. So it's just talking them through in a calm, clear, reassuring manner can really make a huge difference. I think people overestimate how much this first meeting can set the tone for the rest
Mhm.
of the thing. And if you do take it a bit slower, it might feel like too slow. It actually makes a huge, very positive impact on the rest of the process.
Mhm. You said something just then that I would love it if you could expand on a bit,
Yeah.
which is that first you said to explain kind of every step. So, like, if you have to take it beyond the
Mm,
people who were in that meeting, then explaining why. But you also said only telling that one person. Can
yeah.
you answer like why it's so
Yeah.
important to just keep it between the people who need to know?
Yes. So this is a really important factor that sometimes people who are not trans or who are cisgender don't realize how private this is. Certainly,
Mhm.
people are wanting, this trans person is wanting to come out to more people, but there's a time period of kind of heightened privacy while sorting out the details of that sharing with others to make sure that you have the details all squared away. So that's an instance where you don't want to tell a large number of people. Certainly, that might be somebody's instinct is like, okay, we got to start going. It's like, no, you want to just share with one person so that it doesn't get too far afield. Especially, I would say, in a smaller organization, this will be very critical. So you have a small set of people who know at the outset, and then you build the bridge to more people knowing in a sequential manner. Usually, starting with one person in HR so that the rest of HR doesn't really need to know. It's just one person who is going to be kind of holding the information for that position and may also do some system changes and whatnot. So that privacy being key, even though at some point it will no longer be private, but that initial stage is so critical just because there's a lot of misunderstanding about trans and non-binary folks. And if the information isn't properly set up, then you can kind of get you can run away with the kind of more negative side of people kind of blowing things out of proportion or making up a story, or there's whisper campaigns that can sometimes happen. And those are very harmful streams of being. So by having it a kind of a safety privacy container at the outset, very small group of people knowing can set things up to then properly release with full clarification, expectations, so that people really understand how and be set up for success in a good way.
So if that first, like that initial meeting is more kind of connection based and just hearing the person or being with the person that's telling you this about them, what would then a next meeting look like?
Yes. So the next meeting is where it's better. This is now the step to get into more details. So again, this is an employee driven process. So, the first meeting, like you said, just connecting, getting to know, and understanding what the needs are, maybe even some privacy considerations. But then the second meeting is like all about, their position and understanding when, how, what they want to do to disclose or share with other folks. How many people do they want to share with? Especially larger organizations, you don't need to share with the whole organization. Probably not suitable, right? The people that that person interacts with, it might be one team, a few teams, whatnot. So just kind of understanding where this person fits within the organization and what they have in mind for a timeline for sharing that with various folks. We usually also recommend to have managers of other teams know before that team, the members of that team, because it sets up managers to not be caught off guard and to be able to address the questions, quote unquote, concerns, if those arise, to be ready. So rather than being caught off guard by that. So that's a usual a part of that discussion. Also, it's really important to clarify what that person wants to share. Some people think, oh, you kind of got to go into the nitty gritty of that person's story, but not everybody's up for that. And some people just want to share if they've changed their first name or their pronouns. That might be it. They don't want to share anything else. Just this is a matter of fact update, new email address, new name and whatnot, and that's it. Others, maybe they want to have a little short piece about being trans and what that means to them, and maybe a message that what they want to send to folks. But it's up to the individual. I will also say that some people don't want to share at all. And I think that's really important to honor, that perhaps only managers and human resources know about this person being trans and nobody else. And that's something that I think catches people off guard. They think this is all about disclosure, but it may not be. And I think that's important to kind of register, and then also to understand what the expectations of that individual are for others not knowing and what they
Right.
want human resources and the manager to do with the information about them being trans. Perhaps it's being kind of aware of any issues, or being able to respond to things. So some people, they may come out and then want to share on their own time, one on one with individuals. So it may be more of a like organic coming to terms with somebody, in which case the trans or non-binary person, which is totally their right to want to take on that communication, and also to recognize that people will address them in different ways based on knowing or not knowing. And so just being ready to support in that process. Some people might start with that strategy and then realize perhaps it's a little too much for them and then may want to
Mhm.
pivot. And so it's also good to be responsive to what's happening. And you might start with one strategy and pivot to another. So not all of that is being discussed in one meeting, but it is good to talk about timelines, who, what, and how that's going to happen. And another piece to the puzzle is, if there's going to be email sent out, or it's a one-on-one meeting, or it's being raised in an education session. Like there's so many different ways to do it, but important to provide the options, and then somebody can select the ones that are right for them.
You've you've outlined so much in that. I think a lot of this, most people would maybe not even have a clue that there would be so much thought put into that level when you're thinking of someone coming out. And I would imagine that most workplaces haven't actually set anything up for this at all because they didn't maybe consider that a trans person might be working there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when somebody does this, there's somebody comes out, what would you say a lot of organizations are then faced with as
Right.
levels to then deal with?
Yeah. Yes, it is usually not something considered. And what typically happens beyond the series of meetings and really hearing from the employee what they want or need, but then it's also the systems piece where usually that's not set up, and that
Mhm.
one trans person going through all of these systems will highlight in usually pretty painful ways, like, this isn't
Mhm.
set up, what about this, what about that? And it's a what about series of like, oh shoot, we didn't think about this. And
Yeah.
what about benefits, and how do we handle first names? Now this person has a chosen name that they go by day to day, that's new, and their past name, which is still their legal name because it takes a long time to change documents. Oh, this person's non-binary, and we don't have another response option beyond men and women in our gender data collection. I
Right.
could go on, right? It's just like one thing after the other, and this person is highlighting those system limitations because they've not been thought through. And in which case, if that is at play for an organization, it's being matter of fact. Like, you're absolutely right. This is missing. Our sincere apologies, and we're going to go away and work that out, right? Maybe there's a
Mhm.
short-term thing that we can implement, something in a comment section so that it's at least recorded, if that makes sense to the trans employee or the non-binary employee. But let's work on that, you know, offline amongst ourselves
Right.
as managers and human resources, because sometimes what happens is like the organization will be like, oh, what do you think? They're like, we have a real live trans or non-binary person, they must know what to do.
Right. Yes.
And sadly, well, maybe not sadly, of course people don't, they know what the problems are, but they may not
Right.
necessarily know the solutions, or they may know solutions for them as their own distinct gender identity or experience. So it can't capture all of the needs across the gender spectrum. So your organizations are likely going to encounter these things through the trans or non-binary person who's coming out. Another reason why to do this proactively and preemptively,
Mhm.
rather than having to have this person like kind of be bounced about in this like
Right.
maze of chaos, essentially. Um,
Mhm.
and so that is likely at play. And still can be sorted out even if those happen. But it's a less than ideal situation if those do happen. Yeah.
I feel like that's that must come up quite a lot if this isn't set up, beforehand, and then somebody comes out. The idea that you would ask an employee
Mm.
then, like, "Oh, how do you fix the systems?" As if they would know,
I
as if they
know.
have any background. I don't know if you're, I don't know, IT, maybe you might have an idea, but like,
Yeah.
it's just, I wouldn't know where to start, and I work for you. So I feel like that's a really hard thing to like
Yeah.
navigate for somebody who's just trying to come out and like live and work.
Well, and it's coming from a good place. I think the mindset for managers and human resources, like, oh, we want to involve the people who are having
Right.
these experiences, but also recognize that this person is under tremendous, I mean, not everybody, but a lot of the times people are in this tremendous pressure.
Mhm.
They are doing quite a bit of coming out. They're already probably stressed out to the max. And then another thing is added to their plate rather than somebody being like, let me take this off your plate. Don't worry
Mhm.
about it. Apologies that it happened. And now thank you for raising it. And now we're going to go and sort it. Doesn't mean that you can't circle back and be like, we thought of these ideas.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
do those make sense to you? Or could one of those or a few of those work for you? Cool, that's a great way to integrate. But just think about the effort involved in coming up with solutions is a lot of mind, heart, all kinds of spaces to and skill sets too. Like it's not just
Mhm.
people coming up with solutions right off, the cuff of off the
Yeah.
cuff. So yeah, it's a really important thing and not to overload people who are already likely stressed.
Yeah. I want to I want to talk about stress now because
Mhm.
as a manager and you're trying to navigate all of this, and there is the possibility that you might also be faced with other people's responses
Mhm.
to said person coming out, or um, just the situation as a whole. Can I ask you about the role of a manager in that sense, and how to even begin to deal with
Mhm.
that?
Mhm. Yeah, and this is, I think, likely what managers fear the most
Right.
is pushback and not feeling very confident in their ability to respond to that type of pushback. It might not even come in like really strong ways. Uh,
Hmm.
like outright, no, I'm not going to use this person's pronouns. That's probably less likely, although it does happen.
Hmm.
So good to be prepared for that versus I don't get this, it just doesn't make
Hmm.
sense, and it's okay if that's genuinely somebody trying to understand and come to terms and take steps versus somebody who is just kind of digging in their heels, and this is a
Hmm.
subtle way to do that. So there's a bit of listening that's involved in understanding where people are getting stuck. So I think it's important not to jump to conclusions based on if somebody is raising an issue about a trans person. It is listening and understanding what kind of is underneath the words that they are saying. So this does take a bit of kind of emotional intelligence to sort out and sift through. And then, really helping people come up to speed. And it's not like managers have to know everything either. They just need to say, hey, I'm new at this as well. I'm learning. This is what I've learned so far. I am in a continuous learning process about gender diversity. And I know this to be true. I know this to be true. I understand you're struggling with this, but it's actually not as big of a deal. I first thought this too. If you're able to kind of connect with that person as a way to help
Hmm.
them like carry
Hmm.
on. Now, if somebody is willfully resistant, it is important to set strong boundaries to say in our workplace we value inclusion, we value respect. A part of respect is X, Y, and Z, and we expect you to be able to do this. Here are a few different options. So you're not saying there's only one way to do it. If there's several options available to you, you can pick the one that's right for you. And there you go. So it's not
Right.
like this is like an optional thing. If you think about it, respecting trans people, this is what we do, and this is how you can do it. Here's some ways forward. And if they continue to struggle, so continue to monitor the situation is a very important part of that. I think one last thing I'll say on the topic there is that sometimes managers who are cisgender or not trans, they can better understand the cis person's perspective than they can the trans person's experience,
Right. Yeah.
because it's not as accessible, or they just have not as much understanding or time to think about that experience or to deeply understand it. And so there's a bit of a balancing act there where you have to be conscious of that bias towards
Mm-hmm.
understanding the cis person's concerns
Mm-hmm.
and kind of rebalancing it back to be, understanding of the trans person, because that can often have discrimination or challenges persist for the trans person because the
Mm-hmm.
manager is actually siding with the cis person when they're
Right.
actually
Yeah.
causing the problem. So you have to be very careful in that regard. And
Mm-hmm.
that might require a bit more learning, going listening to podcasts like this, or going to other sources to deepen that understanding.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the learning part.
Mhm.
Can you tell me about the importance of education at work?
Yes, education is paramount, especially in a coming out process, because uh, people often just don't know what to do. And in the
Mm-hmm.
absence of any parameters or education for how to be respectful, people will resort to kind of tried and true patterns and
Right.
won't shift to different ways of engaging or understanding one another. And just breaking it down into practical steps that people can realize this is not too off of the usual, but enough to require a little bit of extra effort, but not too much extra, that allow for a better experience for not just trans and non-binary folks, but really everyone. And so that education is a critical part to get people up to speed, to set the stage, to get them to understand the gravity of the situation. This is not a nice to have. This requires our attention, can
Mm-hmm.
really help folks. Because usually, most teams that we've done education in a coming out process, they're just like, "Oh, thank goodness you're here to tell us what to do," because otherwise,
Right.
I would be making it up, right?
Right.
Just tell me what to do. I'll do it. I'm really excited that this person gets to be their true authentic selves now, and I don't want to mess it up, but just
Mm-hmm.
get me up to speed, and that's cool. So it's good to set that up to help people be able to show up for others.
What kind of options are there for education?
Many different options. Well, maybe not many, but certainly live education sessions are very powerful in the sense that, you know, hour and a half or more to go through the specifics. In some cases, when somebody is coming out, we talk specifically about them, like name
Mm-hmm.
them and go through the details as much as they've allowed for, right? We set a container of what's okay to share with others and clarified that. Usually it's just new name, new pronouns. It's not
Right.
extensive, right? We're not going into, and they were born 1973, like just we're
Sure.
keeping it simple. um, but then going through, some of the human rights legislation in cases, so people have that context, so understand this is important.
Mm-hmm.
Then go through the specifics of how to interact and whatnot. What's really key is at the end we have time for Q&A, and that's where people can really get into where they're stuck, and so that we don't translate that onto the trans individual, because
Right.
usually people just need a safe place to digest and go to where their mind is at, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of work with that, unpack it, help them, get more up to speed, or give them strategies for how to navigate different situations. Mistake recovery is like the biggest one.
Right.
Um, and maybe even giving them a little opportunity to practice that too, so that it's not the first time they're doing it. It doesn't feel so
Mm-hmm.
awkward. So those are some crucial things with live, but certainly live is not the only way. I know some organizations really struggle to schedule everybody in one sitting,
Mhm.
and so that's where self-paced options we have on-demand courses at different levels that allow for folks to take that at their own pace and leisure. We have one specific to managers or leaders that are dealing with before, during, and after coming out. So it's specifically geared with those best practices in mind. So that's a really great resource for folks to lean into. So between those two,
Mhm.
pretty well covered.
Can I close up this with just going back again to the toolkit and how, like, you've kind of outlined all of this and like what the steps look like, but um, without a toolkit, what does this tend to look like if you don't have one in place?
Yes. So typically, it looks like a lot of scrambling and a lot of
Right.
hair on fire, just like, I could just imagine somebody running through the hallway with hair afire.
Sure.
I mean, it's not too far off emotionally, maybe.
Hmm.
um, and I can totally feel that too. Like, of course, on other topics, I can very much resonate with that feeling of like, oh
Hmm.
crap, we didn't think this through, and now we're having to like scramble to figure something out. Unfortunately, also, people can not take it seriously. That's another kind of risk
Mm,
factor, is because there's nothing in writing. It's like, well, anything goes. Maybe if I
right.
think about it, I will, but I don't really need to because there's been no context for understanding or setting um, parameters or
Hmm.
expectations for how to specifically respect a trans or non-binary employee. So it can kind of span the like not doing anything and kind of it's a free fall, which
Hmm.
does risk more the human rights troubles
Hmm.
we've seen in a few cases, uh, all the way to this kind of hyper um, uh, anxiety of like, holy crap, we didn't think this through. And now we feel like you have to do double time in a way that
Yeah.
actually increases that trans person's level of stress. And
Right.
not for lack of like, there's goodwill behind that, but it actually
Hmm.
doesn't help. Unfortunately, it just like everybody's shoulders are up to their ears,
Hmm.
and so you just if there's something, even if it's simple, just outlined a bit that can avoid all of that for everyone involved, and everybody is a lot clearer. Doesn't mean it solves all the issues either. I don't want to over index on the value of this, but it does do a lot of heavy lifting. And I think that's beneficial to no matter who somebody is, whether manager, human resources, the trans individual, or uh, colleagues or
Right.
coworkers.
What would you say are some things that maybe people wouldn't have even thought about when it comes to like industry specific situations?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's a few different aspects of the coming out process that, if it's not on a manager or human resources radar, it can often be overlooked and then cause problems down the road or surprises. Maybe not problems, but like, oh, shoot,
Hmm.
we didn't think about this.
Right.
One aspect is travel. If an employee is traveling for an organization, maybe going to a conference or going to clients,
Mhm.
even across the US border, in this moment is a little dicey, maybe a lot
Right.
dicey. So it's not just about the laws, but it's actually about the documentation that that
Hmm.
individual has. So if they're flying with an outdated piece of ID, whether they're going by a different name or maybe their appearance has changed. This can present challenges when going through security or even checking in flights. So just
Hmm.
having a conversation to be like, hey, you're traveling, just want to see if there's anything that we should support or that we need to support you with, right? So not saying that they need to be heavy-handed with it, but just opening it up for conversation where somebody be like, yeah, actually my ID X, Y, and Z, and I'd rather not travel, and I'd rather go to the conference virtually, right? So at least they can register that desire, even if it's temporary. That's an important thing. Or they go, hey, no problem. I've dealt with security a lot. I know how to do this, and just let them know, hey, if we need a backup plan, happy to set that in place so that you feel safe and confident. But really just working with them, so meeting them where they're at. Another thing is if somebody has their name on any like reports or patents or anything with kind of authorship, that's another really important thing to talk through. Do they want those retroactively changed to their current name? Do they want, are they okay with leaving it as is? Those can present challenges to folks. And even if they haven't thought that through, they will really appreciate that being raised to know that, oh, you know what my situation or my issues could be, and we're anticipating them and talking them through. Because I'll just share. I mean, what's humorous to me now, but was stressful at the moment. I used to work in the mining industry, and I was in a meeting with people who didn't know that I was trans, and they shared one of my past reports, and they said, "We want you to base this new report on this past report," and they said my birth name, and I was like, "Oh, right." So that presented a moment of like, do I say this is my report or do I let it slide? I chose not to. It seemed like not the right moment to go into my extensive history to claim that as my report. But I, at the end, they said, "Oh, we'll send you the report." I was like, "Don't worry, I've already got it." So these are the things that if you talk about authorship or things that their names are on, that can hopefully help with some of that. Some people, they're okay with keeping their past name. Others wish to kind of expunge it everywhere. So it's good to talk about that. One last example, there's many other unique considerations, but these are just 3 to put them on your radar, is some jobs require more hands-on physical and labor, and they involve tools. And tools can change or be different based on people's levels of strength. Some can help kind of increase somebody's physical strength in a job, and so it is important to not talk about people's gender affirming journey. That's a very private matter, but more to say we want to keep an open line of communication if you need to change your tool set, right? And it's not making a determination one way or another, but just knowing that the employee can come back and say, actually, I realize that either their strength has increased or decreased and they need to change tools. So it's just open, dynamic forms of communication about those aspects. And that's just for any organization or company that deals with physical labor.
Amazing. Okay, if you have any thoughts or questions that you would like us to speak about in future episodes, then you can email us at podcast@transfocus.ca, or you can find us on social media. Kai, where can they find you?
All the social medias, or maybe not all of them, but many of them. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube, Threads. We've got a lot of great tips and tools that we have weekly posts for you to continue the learning journey on gender diversity.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate it. And hope you all have a good rest of your day.
See you later.
Bye for now.